particularly, and women, particularly those who are not so big that they can go directly to each of our governments to resolve their differences. They want to invest where they can expect a reasonable return and an absolute assurance that the legal system in the country they're investing in will provide due process. I don't think it's reasonable to expect America or Europeans or Russians themselves to invest confidently where in a country in which there are infamous cases in which property rights were violated and not protected. It may be unfair, but it is a perception. A country in which investors, Russians and Americans, can lose when they succeed. Lose when they succeed. In fact, have lost fortunes because of legal abuses. A company which can be seized or an owner imprisoned on a political whim. In which a lawyer like Sergei Magnitsky, I hope I pronounced that correctly, can be arrested after accusing the police of fraud and then die in detention before being tried. No amount of government cheerleading or public relations or U.S. support or rebranding will bring wronged or nervous investors back to a market they perceive to have these shortcomings. Only bold and genuine change. I'm not here to lecture. I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to tell Russia what to do. But I know from my experience, almost every country I visit, particularly smaller ones, not great countries like Russia, the first thing they'll tell me is, can you encourage, Mr. Vice President, American businesses to invest here? And this is the same answer. Get your system right. Don't make it a gamble. Have certainty. Over the past few months alone, our administration has spoken out against allegations of misconduct in the trial of Fyodor Kovinsky. You can tell I didn't do very well in Russian. And of the beating and detention of Strategy 31 demonstrators. Some of you may say, well, how can you say those things out loud, Mr. Vice President, and expect to have a better relationship? They're necessary to have a good relationship. We should not have to make choices. We will continue to object when we think human rights are violated or democracy and the rule of law is undermined. For us, these are matters of principle. But I would argue they're also matters of pragmatism. History shows that in industrialized societies, economic modernization and political modernization go hand in hand. You don't get one without the other. Or put it this way, you don't get industrial modernization without political modernization. And I realize it's been a short journey since, as we say in the West, the wall came down. And I realize there is an awful lot that's been accomplished. But, modernization in every way is essential. I think that's why so many Russians now call on their country to strengthen their democratic institutions. Courts have to be empowered to uphold the rule of law and protect those playing by the rules. Non-governmental watchdogs should be applauded as patriots, not traitors. As a famous American jurist once said, a Supreme Court justice, he said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. In today's society, we'd probably say transparency is the best lubricant. Journalists must be able to publish without fear of retribution. In my country, it was a newspaper, not the FBI or the Justice Department. It was a newspaper, the Washington Post, that brought down a president for illegal actions. Thomas Jefferson said that if he only had a choice of a free press or what we had, he said he'd choose a free press. It's the greatest guarantee of freedom there is, the so-called third estate. And believe me, to the American press up there, they drive me crazy. It's not like they say nice things about me all the time, but I really mean it. It is the single best guarantee of political freedom. A viable opposition, public parties that are able to compete is also essential to good government. Just as the competition between top athletes produces better players and better teams, it's also true that that works as well among firms who provide better services and better products. Political competition means better candidates, better politics, and most importantly, governments that better represent the will of their people. In my view, the Russian people already understand this. Polls show that most Russians want to choose their national and local leaders in competitive elections. They want to be able to assemble freely, and they want a media to be independent of the state, and they want to live in a country that fights corruption. That's democracy. They're the ingredients of democracy. So I urge all of you students here, don't compromise on the basic elements of democracy. You need not make that Faustian bargain. And it's also the message I heard recently when President Medvedev said last week, and I quote him, "Freedom cannot be postponed." Joe Biden didn't say that. The president of Russia said that. And when the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Kudin said, quote, "Only fair elections can give the authorities the mandate of trust we need to help implement economic reforms." This is a Russian leader, not an American leader. Russia and America both have a lot to gain if these sentiments are turned into actions, which I am hopeful they will be. Now, there are some in Russia who say, we hold your country to a reasonably high standard. It is true our expectations are high, but it's because we've learned during the Cold War just how capable the Russian people are. When you launched Sputnik, we had to marshal our greatest intellectual talents to begin to meet the challenge. And we had no illusions ever about the capacity of our then adversary. And in this new era of partnership, our respect for the Russian people as innovators, as thinkers, remains undiminished. Unleashing the intellectual capacity of this country is not only in Russia's interest, but it's in America's national interest, and I would argue the world's interest. This is no longer a zero-sum game. Folks, as you well know, we've already come a long way. I visited Moscow for the first time in '73, but in the summer of '79, I was asked by then President Carter, some 30 years ago, to lead a delegation of United States senators who were uncertain about what was then called the SALT talks, SALT II, Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. And I was a strong supporter of that treaty. But there were a group of new senators who were not familiar with the treaty and agnostic on it. And I was asked to bring 9 of them to Russia. I sat across a table, a conference table in the Kremlin, across a table from Leonid Brezhnev. To his left was Defense Minister Ustinov, and on his right was Premier Kosygin. To state the obvious, it was a very different time. And I recall President Brezhnev was sicker than we thought then, and he excused himself and left the meeting early and turned it over to Kosygin, Premier Kosygin, who in his opening statement said the following, I will never forget it. He said, before we begin our discussion, Senator, let's agree that we do not trust you and you do not trust us. And we both have good reason. Literally. He was absolutely right back then. But he would be absolutely wrong today. Russians and Americans inside and outside of government have worked extremely hard to overcome decades of mistrust, to identify common ground, to fashion a more secure and more prosperous future for both our countries. And in the second decade of this new century, the United States and Russia no longer have good reason not to trust one another. There is no good reason not to trust one another. It's legitimate to be skeptical as you are in dealing with any nation, because their self-interest may be different to you, but it does not translate into we cannot trust. If two great nations that for 40 years stood on the opposite sides of the 20th century deepest divide can stand side by side facing the 21st century's challenges, it will benefit not just the American people and the Russian people, but all people. That future is not just the stuff of which dreams are made of. We are already moving in that direction. Yes, it can be knocked off course, but we're already moving in that direction. And I say to you young people in this audience, it's incumbent upon you and incumbent upon the young people of my country to not allow us to get off that path, to stay in this direction. And I know that for many of you here today, this will be a joint effort, that you'll join us. There's much to overcome, but there's much we've done. And I would argue that based on what we've recently done, it's a clear indication we can fundamentally change this relationship on a permanent basis. Thank you all for being so gracious and waiting, and even more gracious listening. Thank you.